Yo, what up? So, I meant to do a video the other day, and I totally forgot to record it. But I'm making it today because it popped into my head, and I thought it was an interesting topic, and I thought it might be something useful. And you probably understand what the video is going to be about because you probably clicked on this video because of the title, because my thumbnails sure aren't all that appealing right now. But what exactly is happiness? That is kind of the topic of this video before I head to the grocery store. So the reason why I wouldn't make this video is because I think about like I have like these weird internal debates with myself, and I try to think about like a concept and really break it down to its core components. And I try to really think about the topics and the concepts that a lot of people seem to struggle with or debate heavily or have trouble conceptualizing. And I'm not saying that they struggle to conceptualize it because of anything wrong with them. I'm just saying that the topics in general are tough to conceptualize. They're very abstract concepts. They're tough to think about, which is why I think about them, and which is why I try to make sense of them in the best way possible, at least that I can. So happiness is one of those concepts. And when it comes to happiness, I feel like, first of all, before I get into my idea of what happiness is and my definition for it, I think that the idea of happiness, at least my definition of it, is different than what most people would consider happiness. I think when most people talk about happiness, they're thinking about the idea of joy. And I think what they want is kind of a long, sustained feeling of joy. And what I call joy is more of that feeling of like dopamine, that like high pleasure type sensation. Like when you, say for example, have anticipation for something and you finally get it, or when you feel like it's going to be this really cool, exciting thing, that's joy, in my personal opinion. Or say for example, you're like a kid and it's Christmas Day and you come downstairs and you see a bunch of gifts under the tree and you're excited to open each and every gift and see all the presents inside. To me, that's joy. That's not happiness, that's joy. And I think a lot of people would call that happiness, but they're using more of a blanket term. And I think you have to really define things specifically in order to really understand how they work. So if you call everything happiness, that's just a positive emotion. You're not able to get to the core of what that thing, in this situation, happiness, truly is. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm defining joy and happiness a little bit different. I think what most people think of as joy or as happiness is truly joy. What I think of as happiness is more of that general feeling of positivity, or maybe a contentness. I don't know which is the correct word, but you know what I mean. Just like that general feeling of positivity that one feels in life. Like for example, if you wake up and you are super upset, you're by default depressed, you're unhappy, you're thinking about like all of these negative things, you're super stressed out, I would say you're probably not a very happy person. However, if you wake up and in general, your mindset is in a positive state, you're not thinking about too many negative things, your default setting always comes down to you being in a more positive state than negative, then I would say you're happy. And I want to be clear on something, because I'm talking solely about the internal emotions that you might have, while understanding that in the real world, external things will affect your day. And I'll give you a quick example of what I mean by that, just to kind of make this point clear. I would consider myself a pretty happy guy in general. I consider myself happy for a bunch of reasons, and I'll explain some of those in this video. But when I wake up in the morning, I don't usually feel that many negative emotions. And the reason why I say I'm happy, and the reason why I can kind of pinpoint that I'm happy, is because there were points in my life where I would wake up super stressed, super unhappy, just feeling negative about myself, not liking who I was as an individual. So it's easier for me to kind of understand the difference between the two emotions, between happiness and unhappiness. Does that make sense? So when I wake up, I usually feel happy. Now, there can be external things that make me feel slightly unhappy. For example, this morning I woke up and my room was just super cold. Like right now, I live in Northern Virginia, and I'm shooting this video in January, like late January. It's been like 20 degrees lately. It's so cold. I hate the cold. And I woke up and it was freezing in my room, and I had the heat on and everything, and it was just freezing. I think one of my windows was like slightly cracked, and I didn't realize it when I went to bed, and it just made the heat pointless. Like my heater, it made it pointless. So I woke up slightly unhappy. But once I got out of that external situation, once I got into heat, or at least normal temperature, I no longer was unhappy. I felt perfectly fine. And so I think that's the difference between happiness and unhappiness. It's kind of, to me though, that sensation, that happiness or unhappiness, is almost like a thermostat. Think about it that way. It's like a thermostat. And your happiness or unhappiness is set to a certain temperature. And no matter what happens externally, a happy person will bounce back, not necessarily quickly, but eventually they'll bounce back to a more content state. Where I think a person that's unhappy will automatically, no matter what happens, even if something positive happens externally, like maybe they got a gift or maybe they got some kind of reward or something, they get that like joy, even though they experience that joy, because they're unhappy, they eventually start to come back down to feeling that negative state. Does that make sense? Like joy, again, it's one of those things that to me is external. It's not the same as happiness. It's something that could lead to happiness if it happens consistently or frequently enough, but the feeling in itself is not happiness, it's joy. And when you feel those negative emotions, when you feel like a little bit of depression, or when you feel like a little bit of sadness or melancholy, whatever, those things are temporary. They can make you unhappy in the long run, like in the general sense, but they're not unhappiness per se. Does that make, I really want, hopefully that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to explain it better or articulate that better. But I want to make that distinction a bit clear, because I want to explain to you what I think causes unhappiness and happiness. Now, I do think that in the grand scheme of things, by positive things happening to you more consistently, you will be a happier person. And of course, by negative things happening to you if negative things happen to you more consistently, you will become an unhappy person. But in the grand scheme of things, this is just kind of what I personally think ultimately creates unhappiness or happiness. And this is what it all kind of boils down to, in my personal opinion. Your unhappiness is the result of your expectations not meeting with reality. I think all happiness and unhappiness comes solely from that. And I think you can kind of run through a lot of different thought experiments and ultimately come up with that same conclusion. So let's say, for example, it's Christmas and you get a bunch of gifts under the tree. And I know I said that this is more like joy, but I'm just kind of using this as a quick example. Because like I said, lots of joy is what leads to happiness, and lots of sadness or depression is what leads to just general unhappiness. So I'm using like one key point in time just to kind of illustrate a bigger point. Let's just say it's Christmas. You have person A and person B. Person A comes downstairs, he sees a bunch of gifts under the tree. He opens the gifts. It's all socks, maybe a scarf, some hats. He wanted maybe a PlayStation 5 or a Nintendo Switch or some new action figure or some DVD, I don't know, some movies, whatever. He's not happy. He doesn't experience joy because his expectations have not matched with his reality. He expected cool toys. He expected video games. The reality is that he got clothing. And you know, I'm sure we've all experienced this. When you're like a little kid, you want like the next big thing, like the thing that's marketed or advertised on TV, and then maybe your parents can't afford it because that's realistic. That's totally fine. Your parents can't afford it, but they don't want you to feel sad or unhappy, so they get you something that might be beneficial, that you might actually need, but you don't want. But you as a kid don't really understand that, so you feel this negative emotion. Now, when that stacks up too much, that's where the unhappiness comes from. Now, on the other hand, let's take person B. He comes downstairs, the exact same, but he understands that his family is not in the best financial situation. This is a more self-aware kid. Let's say he's 8 years old. They're both 8 years old. This kid's a bit more self-aware. He understands my family doesn't have a lot of money. Throughout most Christmases, I don't really get many gifts, and I'm totally okay with that. I've come to expect that I don't get many gifts, and when I do get gifts, they're not special. They're like clothes, you know, nothing super special, but nothing, you know, he still gets something, better than nothing. That's his norm. He expects it. He comes downstairs, he sees a bunch of gifts. He's a little bit more excited than normal because this is the most gifts he's seen under a tree ever. He opens his gifts. Lots of clothing. But one of his gifts is a PlayStation 5. And deep down, he's been wanting that PlayStation 5 for the entire year. He's been thinking about it so much. He's been seeing commercials. All his friends have it. He's been playing it at his buddy's house, whatever. He gets that PlayStation 5 and he is elated. He's super excited. He's happy. And again, it's joy. But in the general sense, let's just call it happiness. The reason why he gets this sensation of joy is because his expectations have not met his reality. But it's in the opposite direction. So his expectation was, I'm going to get clothing. I'm not going to get that much cool stuff. He expected it. The reality is that he got some of what he expected, the clothing, but he got more than what he expected. And that's where the joy came in. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because I like to think that this whole idea of happiness and sadness, to be an unhappy person or a happy person, is malleable. And there's different books I've read about what it means to be happy. I've read books that happiness can make you perform better in life. It makes you a more successful individual. I've read books on kind of these different theories about ultimately, like the minor chemistry things, the brain chemistry things that makes one happy. But I like to think that it doesn't need to be that complicated. You can choose to be happy solely by changing your perspective on life. If in your life you learn how to manage your expectations and be more realistic about how things are to play out or how things are to occur, or not set super large expectations, even if they could occur, even if a certain reality could come as a result, then you are more likely to just be happy. Does that make sense? And like, maybe, I don't know if this sounds like common sense or not, because I personally don't think this is common sense. I think a lot of people, when they feel unhappy, especially after a sustained period of time, my suggestion to them would be just look at your life and think about all the things in your life that, one, you probably take for granted and that you expect to happen. Like when I graduated from college, for example, or when I was in college, I'll give you a personal example. When I was in college, I've probably told the story many times, I had to work at a gas station. And my expectation at that time was that I'd be stuck at that gas station forever. And it sounds weird in hindsight to say that. It's like, how would you be stuck at this gas station forever? Of course, you'd probably get a different job at some point. But at that time, I saw a lot of people who were older than me who were at that gas station, and they would say stories of like, yeah, I've been in this gas station for like 10 years, whatever, 20 years. You know, I'm working like these 2 part-time jobs, working at Walmart and stuff. So my expectation was that, damn, I'm now in this situation where I'm probably not going to graduate. I don't know if I have any skills to get a different job. I don't know how to get a different job. All I know is the gas station. All I know is my current reality. And because that's all I know, that's all that I can expect. But deep down, I expected of myself to have higher potential. I wanted to have a better job. And I'm not shitting on people who work at gas stations. It's a perfectly fine job if you want to work at a gas station. But at the time, my mindset was that I was at least intelligent enough and hardworking enough and maybe a little bit entitled to the point where I thought I would deserve more than a gas station, than, you know, $7 an hour or $7.50 an hour at a gas station. I thought I could at least have, you know, it sounds like low expectations, but at the time it was nice, $10 an hour or $15 an hour. I at least wanted that. So when my expectations of what I could be didn't match with my reality of what I currently was at that time, I felt super unhappy. I felt super depressed. But in reality, if I could just manage my expectations better, I wouldn't have been in that situation. So hopefully this all makes sense. And I'm going to say this too, because I wrote this book years ago, and this is not like a self-promotion, but I just want to bring this up. I wrote, because it was a controversial chapter in my book. I wrote this book years ago called 27 by 27. It's a terrible title in hindsight, but it was just kind of me giving my thoughts and experiences and just some philosophical lessons that I learned up until the age of me being 27. And one of them was that good and bad do not exist. It's only a matter of perspective. And I still think that's completely true. When you feel unhappy about things or when you feel happy about things, that's not a good or bad thing. To feel unhappy about something is not a bad thing. And to feel happy about something is not necessarily a good thing. It's all a matter of perspective. Your happiness can lead to self-destruction when you don't kind of control it. Your unhappiness can lead to greatness when you learn to control it. If you're in a situation right now that makes you unhappy, cool, that's perfectly fine. That unhappiness can be the motivation to get you from point A to point B. Just like it was for me. When I was unhappy at the gas station, that motivated me to do more things, to not be in the gas station. But if you're happy, that can also be detrimental, because you being happy might prevent you, it might make you comfortable, it might prevent you from actually doing anything new. to get to the next level or to get to where you want to be. You might be in a job right here, right now, and you might make decent money and you might be comfortable in your job. All your bills might be paid. You might not be that stressed out. But the downside of that is because you're so comfortable and because you're so happy, you're never going to go anywhere further than where you are now. You're going to end up wasting your life because you're not willing to step out of your comfort zone and be slightly unhappy in order to become exponentially more happy. Does that make sense? Another quick story. I like telling stories because I feel like it helps understand a point that I'm making. Years ago, I used to work at a law firm. I may have said this before, I'm not sure, in other videos. I'm sure I said it in other videos. I used to work at a law firm, and I was making some pretty good money at the time. I was making about 60K, close to 60K at the law firm, and then I was doing real estate on the side, and I had a business on the side, so I was making more money. And in the grand scheme of things, I was actually quite comfortable. I wasn't that stressed out. My week was usually, I'd go to the law firm, I'd work. It was despite people at the law firm saying it was a high stress job, I think I had gone through so much stuff that was stressful for me that working at the law firm, and at least the position I was working in, I wasn't a lawyer. So I'm sure they were probably more stressed than I would have been. Maybe not. Maybe I would have been a perfectly content lawyer as well that wasn't that stressed out. But because I had been so stressed out by things in the past, I didn't find that job to be that stressful. Obviously, there were some things that I found stressful, mostly because it was things that, like, I don't like always being told what to do, because I feel like sometimes when people tell you what to do or when people expect things of you, they can be a bit short-sighted or narrow-minded with their expectations. Like, it's like if a boss gives you a task and the task, realistically speaking, won't be quick to finish, but he expects you to get it done in like 5 minutes, it's stressful, not because the task itself is stressful or difficult, but because he's being so unrealistic, or she is being so unrealistic about the expectations, that you just get frustrated. Does that make sense? But for the most part, I was completely unstressed. My weekdays were like that. Weekends, I would go out and just like flirt with girls, go to bars, drink. It was pretty fun. It was just a normal, it was a I call it a mediocre lifestyle. And I don't say mediocre in like a negative way. I'm not putting people down. I think it's mediocre in the sense that it's average. It's common. And I don't want you to hear that word mediocre and think bad or negative. I'm just saying mediocre in a way that's synonymous with just average. It was an average lifestyle for the most part. Average in the sense that I had a decent amount of money. I wasn't like in crippling debt, and all my basic needs were covered, if we're thinking about it from like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs type scenario. But because I was so comfortable, deep down, when I would kind of like sit there and debate myself and assess my life, it actually made me a little bit unhappy, because it was like, it felt like I wasn't going to go anywhere different. And I literally did this test, like when I was working at a law firm, where I projected out like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, like literally like that. Like I projected first 5 years out, then 10 years out, then 15 years out, then 20 years out, and then so on. And I thought to myself, assuming, kind of taking the trend that I have now, if I were to continue on this path, would current me, would the future me be happy with the decisions that current me are going to make or would make? Does that make sense? So, for example, if by the time I hit 80, would I look back on my 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s and think to myself, man, I made some very good decisions? Or would I sit back and look at myself and say, you know what, I could have done more. I kind of slacked off. I kind of took the easy route. I was kind of comfortable. I could have really pushed myself a bit harder. I could have taken a little bit more risk. I could have really demonstrated to myself what I could have been. Would I be regretful with myself? Does that make sense? I thought about it, and I sat there and said to myself, if I continue at the law firm, as great as the job is, I'd be making probably 60, 70, 80K slowly. It wouldn't be quick. It'd be like a slow creep. By the time I hit 40s, I'd still be at that exact same position, doing the exact same thing day in and day out. Eventually, I'd probably find a girlfriend, get married. Again, be mediocre, just be average. I wouldn't be exceptional. I wouldn't be able to tell a story that I personally would want to read. I think that's a big thing of life. To me, a big part of life is telling a story that you want read. Like, it's cool to have a very interesting life. One, so that way you can be proud of the life you've lived, but also so that way you would hope that other people would read your story and be like, man, that was a cool dude. That dude was fascinating. I just read Arnold Schwarzenegger's book, Total Recall. He was an interesting dude. He was a fascinating guy. I shouldn't say was, he's still alive, but he is a fascinating guy. He had a very eclectic lifestyle. He had a very interesting life. Just from the idea of going from Austria, from where he grew up, to coming over here, even the ups and downs, like his father dying, his brother dying young, being involved with the Kennedys, just everything. I'm not going to go super deep into it. You can read the book yourself, or I'll probably talk about it in a different video. But that whole process is fascinating. And I thought to myself, could I be fascinating? Could I be interesting? Would I be able to tell a good story if I were to look at the story of my life at the end of my life? And at that time, my answer was no. If I continued on this path of working at the law firm and just being comfortable, my story wouldn't be interesting. It would just be average. It'd be the same as everyone else's story. And what's the point of having that story? What's the point of living a life that everyone can live? So I didn't want to do it. And so I used my unhappiness I'm tying it all back around. I know that was a very long tangent, but I'm tying it back around. I used my unhappiness from my future projection of myself to give me the motivation to quit my job. And at the time, that motivated me to start a different business with a business partner. And we created Affinity, and I quit my job, and that led to its own kind of situation and circumstances. But I don't regret it, because it's a story. It's interesting. It's appealing. It's something. It's different. It's not mediocre. It's not average. And that's the thing that, in the grand scheme of life, makes me the happiest. So I bring that up because I know some people watching this video, they might sit there and say, you know what, well, in general, I'm pretty happy. So I'm in a good position. And my thing is, like, happiness is neither good nor bad. It's what you make of it. And if you stay in a happy place too long, you start to get comfortable and you start to adapt. And that adaptation to the happiness is actually what leads to unhappiness, I think, in the grand scheme of things, and regret. So you got to really be careful with that. But I think the point that I want to emphasize in this video before I wrap it up is that your happiness or your unhappiness is 1000% in your control, because you can just manage the way you expect things to play out. Some dudes will sit there and they'll flirt with girls and they'll be unhappy because girls are rejecting them. Well, if your expectation was that 1 out of 100 girls are gonna say yes and the other 99 are gonna say no, then you probably don't feel as bad about the rejections. You go up to a girl, she rejects you, you're like, okay, fuck it. I expected her to reject me. Who cares? Move on to the next girl. Every rejection I get leads me one step closer to my yes. If you think about it that way, well, now you've managed your happiness more effectively. Now you've taken back control of your life. And now you understand, you know, the result. And I'm not saying that 1 to 99 is true, but the point that I want to make is that you can change the way you think about things, and that'll control your happiness or unhappiness. It's almost like another quick example. I know I'm going on for a while, but I want to give another quick example. I see a lot of people when they have money, and they seem so unhappy sometimes. Not all of them. There's plenty of people with money that are very happy, but I see a lot of people with money that seem super unhappy. And you see people like those child stars that start doing drugs, or people that have like this big fall, whatever. Just picture someone that you know that probably has some money, whether you know them in real life or not, or that you know them through social media. The reason why they're unhappy is the same thing. It's their expectations are not managed. Maybe they believe themselves to be super great, almost like hyper narcissistic, to the point where they think everyone should just bow down to them. I'm sure there are people like that, by the way. But when people don't bow down to them, or when people stop caring about them, or when people find them no longer interesting, then they're unhappy, despite having the money and despite having all the stuff and despite having the clout. No one likes them anymore. No one cares about them. So they're unhappy. And that's because their expectation was that they'd be on top forever, however they define being on top. And when the reality is that people no longer saw them as being on top, now they're upset, now they're unhappy. But they can easily manage that. They can just say, well, in reality, of course, obviously, you know, I'm not going to be on top forever. Obviously, people are going to pay attention to me forever. Obviously, it's going to require some work for me to get their attention. If they had that mindset, they wouldn't be unhappy, or at least not for that reason. Same thing with money. You see people who don't have enough money. You see someone who's like a 28, and I was guilty of this myself. You see someone who's like a 27 or 28-year-old, or you are someone who's a 27 or 28-year-old, and you see some dude online who's like 22 who got this big crypto pump and he's fucking balling out. And you sit there and think to yourself, I'm not happy because I'm 26 or 27 or 28, and I'm not achieving enough because I see that dude over there who's 22 hanging out with all the hot girls. He's got the Lamborghini, he's got the Ferrari, he's going on all these expensive, nice, luxurious trips or vacations. And here I am working my shit 9-to-5 job, not making much money. I'm making like $20,000 or $30,000. Where the fuck did I go wrong? You got to manage your expectations you got to manage your expectations and understand how things work in reality. Your expectation was that you could be like him, and you see his age. You almost kind of compare yourself based on age, when in reality, you know nothing about him. 1, he could be faking it. 2, he could be living a shit life. 3, he could be a scammer. So you think he made his money like from some crypto pump or from some business. Meanwhile, he scammed people and made money in an illegitimate way, and he's just lying about it. You know, there's lots of reasons. There's lots of things you just don't understand about that person when you're making this comparison. But you can always go back to controlling your expectations. Your expectation could be, well, he got lucky and got rich. But is that the norm? No, it's not the norm. Is the norm the amount of money that you're currently making? Probably. Okay, cool. So now your expectations, you've managed your expectations more effectively. Now you understand that you're not in that bad of a position. Chances are you might be in a fantastic position. You might be able to sit there and really like count out all the things that are positive in your life. And from there figure out, you know what? I'm actually in a very good position. I'm actually quite privileged. And I don't say privileged in like a negative way. Some people use the word privileged and they mean it like as an insult. I'm saying privileged in a positive way. Like, I have eyesight. I can hear. I can speak. I have clothes to wear. I don't work in a sweatshop. I don't work in some mine overseas. I don't, you know, like there's a lot of things you can sit there and stack up and be grateful for that you have not earned. Again, I'm not saying this in a negative way. I say this about myself too all the time. That you might not have earned, and you might not have even thought about. You might be taking it for granted all the time. You can stack that up and realize just how fortunate you truly are. And once you start to do that, managing your expectations versus reality, then you become happy. So that was my long answer to the idea of what is happiness. Again, to me, happiness is just when your expectations of reality don't match with reality. It's when you believe something should happen and it doesn't happen. But you can control the should. You can control the should. And if you control the should, you can control how you feel. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. If it does, or if it doesn't, or if you disagree, or if you agree, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. And by the way, my goal for this year is 2024. My goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Please help me out by subscribing to the channel. I would appreciate it a lot. Yeah, like I said, let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Share the video if you thought it was interesting or fascinating, or you know, maybe you thought it was long-winded. Then you can talk shit about me in the comments below. But anyway, peace out. I'll see you next video. Bye.